everyone. This will be the reading of It Comes in Waves as the Shouts Turn into Whispers by Queen of All Hell, read by Insect Overlord. This is a one-shot with about 3,000 words, with content warnings for graphic depictions of pain, mentions of nausea/vomiting, and mentions of past child neglect. This fic is not rated, and the creator chooses not to use archive warnings. Here is the summary. Tim deals with a migraine in the middle of his workday. Bruce is there to comfort him. Can be read as a standalone. It starts as so many unfortunate events do, in a corporate meeting room. It's some kind of market meeting that Tim quite honestly has no reason or interest in being there for. The current speaker is droning on in this painful monotone lecture voice, only occasionally gesturing towards something on the projector screen. Meanwhile, the fluorescent lights buzz away above them, like backup singers for the presenter's nasally hum. The combined unpleasantness of the sounds is really making Tim wish he could just run an ice pick through his eardrums. Nevertheless, Tim is doing his best to keep up his mask of the politely interested and invested higher up, but it's getting harder and harder by the minute. He doesn't realize how hard he's squinting until he catches a glimpse of his reflection in the glass tabletop. Tim knows for certain that his eyesight is not bad. It's near perfect, as a matter of fact. But everyone around has a shiny outline now, just like when you look at the sun for too long and start seeing colors around dark blobs in your vision. He doesn't really remember when that started happening. It's making it a little harder to discern what's going on across the table, since all the text on the slideshow has bled into a solid streaks of black. Tim looks back up at the speaker and tries to scribble down some kind of note, if only to look busy. Now his eyes are starting to water, and there's a tingling in the back of his neck as if someone is holding their hand a fraction of an inch above his skin without actually touching it. It's getting harder and harder by the second. If this meeting doesn't end soon, Tim is going to have to find a way to slip out. The lights seem to get louder and louder as the minutes tick by. With that comes an overwhelming smell of too heavy cologne from the man next to him and whatever cleaning chemicals were last used in here. His nose is burning with the strength of the scents, and it's making him nauseous now. Not in a run-for-the-trash-can-right-now kind of way, but enough to throw him off balance and force him to be conscious of his breaths. He hasn't noticed it before, but the pressure in his head is growing like someone is just continuing to tighten a clamp around his skull. This is perhaps the easiest thing to ignore. Tim lives with some degree of pain every single day. He can count on one hand the number of days in his entire life where he cannot remember having a headache at all. They aren't typically debilitating. Normally, they're just another part of the symphony of background noise and sensory overwhelm he deals with, but they do act as a biometer for his overall state. Over the years, he's noticed that if he does something wrong, the headache gets worse. If he doesn't drink enough water right away, the headache intensifies. Eats a little too much sugar at once, more pain. Even slightly more stress than usual, more pain. Slept a few minutes too little, pain. Too much or too little caffeine, pain. He's tried medication and everything else he can to eliminate or at least lessen the headaches, but nothing seems to work for them. The only progress he's ever made is with reducing the frequency of the migraines, which appears to be more or less separate from the daily headaches. But less frequent does not mean non-existent, which results in situations like these. Tim glances down at the itinerary he scribbled on the corner of his notebook last night. After this meeting, he has a lunch break, which means he can go take his emergency meds in his office and lay down in the dark and quiet of his car for an hour. Then, if he's very lucky, continue his day with minimal side effects, which is unlikely given the meds' penchant for either putting him to sleep or making him a living zombie in terms of cognitive functionality. There are only about 15 minutes left in the scheduled time for this meeting, but it feels more like an hour as he counts down the minutes. Tim briefly entertains the idea of just walking out right now. He couldn't really get in trouble for it, considering he's the person in charge here, but it certainly wouldn't make him look good to his employees. Instead, he averts his eyes from the too bright projector screen and pretends to write more notes. 10 minutes to go, and he can feel every pulse of blood vessels on the right side of his head. 8 minutes left, and it feels like there's a jackhammer behind his eyes. 5 minutes more, and Tim can't decide if the right side of his head has gone numb or the pain is just so white-hot it's searing off any feeling he has left. 2 minutes, and Tim is preparing himself for the trek across the hall to the elevator, and then to his office. He breathes deep and tries not to let his brain melt inside his skull. When the speaker finally ends the presentation a minute early, Tim does his best not to wobble as he stands. He waits a moment while his vision whitens out and tries to hide it by collecting his notes and smoothing out his suit jacket. He grits his teeth through the necessary handshakes and smiles with the meeting participants and hopes to all that is holy that no one can see how badly his hands tremble. When he finally exits the meeting room, Tim stumbles at the change in lighting. It isn't really any brighter in the halls, but the adjustment of his pupils to the light makes it feel like the floor has suddenly dropped out from beneath his feet. At least it doesn't smell quite so strongly of cologne and chemical cleaner out here. The elevator is a daunting task. His vision already feels like it's swimming. He steps into the thankfully empty elevator car and after a few tries manages to hit a button. Tim thinks it's the corner button for his floor. His hand-eye coordination is really not cutting it at the moment. He clutches the handrail of it like a lifeline, knuckles turning white while he tries not to tip over. Tim really doesn't want to think about what he must look like right now. The bobbing of the elevator might as well be the rise and fall of a roller coaster for all he cares. The movement feels like the worst whiplash he's ever experienced, worse than this very first time with a grapple. When it finally comes to an end and the door dings open, Tim has to consciously will his legs to stumble forward. He does his best to remain upright while the hall blinks in and out of his vision. This migraine is escalating much faster than he anticipated. Good thing he's only a door away from his office, and it looks like everyone else in the hall has already left for lunch. It's even better that he thought to turn off the lights before he left his first meeting early in the morning. It takes much longer and many more near misses than it really should to actually catch the drawer pull on his desk, but Tim finally does. And would you look at that? The bottle is empty. Go figure that past mid-migraine Tim wouldn't have thought to throw the bottle out and write a note to get the prescription refilled. Damn it, past mid-migraine Tim, he thinks as hot tears prickle his eyes. This really is not ideal. Deep breath. He doesn't need to start crying now. He's an adult, and more importantly, it will worsen the headache. Bruce. Bruce keeps emergency meds with him precisely for this situation. That just requires that Tim go and find Bruce, who could be any number of places at this very moment. The thought of having to search through the building is daunting, and it also means he would be wasting precious time when the meds could be kicking in. He could call or text Bruce, but that does require looking at his phone screen, which doesn't exactly sound like the best experience at the moment. Not that anything really does. It is, however, the lesser of two evils. Eyes closed, he unlocks his phone and squints his eyes open just the slightest bit so he can turn the screen brightness down as low as it will go, which isn't nearly low enough, but it will have to suffice. By the time he navigates to Bruce's contact, he doesn't have it in him to type, so he chooses to dictate his text at the risk of having everything be misunderstood through his slurred words. Need emergency meds. Gonna be in my car on the second floor of parking garage. Is what he tries for. Whether or not his phone actually catches any of it is beyond the scope of his knowledge, because the bright white words in the blue text bubble look significantly more like breaking waves than actual letters when he tries to read them. Okay, time to actually get to the car. It takes about 10 minutes, a pair of sunglasses that make him feel like a stereotypical stuck-up CEO for wearing inside, and a few too many close calls with vomiting in 2 separate elevators before Tim is actually anywhere near being able to shrivel into a weepy ball the way he wants to. At this point, someone might as well be trying to chop his head and neck into little melon cube-sized bits with a red-hot table saw and then hitting them with pepper spray. Tim unlocks the back passenger door, cringes at the beep the car makes as he does so, and crawls into the back seat. With the doors closed, it's blissfully quiet. Most people have already left to take their lunch breaks, and there are only the occasional muffled sounds of cars locking and unlocking outside. He just sits upright for a minute and attempts to breathe through the mounting nausea. When it finally feels like he isn't going to hurl at this very moment, he pulls off his suit jacket. After another few breaths, He begins to slide down to lay across the bench. It's an agonizingly slow descent, and the arms he's using to support himself threaten to give out more than once. At long last, Tim brings his legs in to curl towards his chest like a sick child. He feels pitiful for it, but there really isn't much else he can do at the moment. After an indeterminate amount of time, Tim works up the energy to remove his sunglasses from where they press a little too hard into his temple. He quickly replaces them with his suit jacket thrown over his head, which helps to block out more light. Alone, in the safety of his car, Tim allows a pathetic whimper to escape him. He hates how vulnerable the pain makes him feel. He can hardly open his eyes, much less string together a complex thought. It's so awful and helpless, the migraines always make him feel like a scared kid again, with no one around to watch over him. He's thankful he doesn't have to deal with them on a weekly basis anymore, but it does mean that he's not as used to managing this kind of pain as he once was, and gosh, does it hurt. The nausea is ever present. Even laying down, he feels like he's on a ship that's being thrown side to side by a violent storm. Even his own breathing seems to make it worse. Every inhale has him feeling like he's about to vomit. As soon as one wave of nausea ends, another one grows rapidly in intensity. Tim whimpers again and pulls the jacket tighter around his head, hoping beyond hope that it will somehow make him feel better. Predictably, it does not. In the dark quiet of his car, Tim floats on a sea of agony. Blinding lights dance in sickening patterns behind his eyelids, feeling like searing hot pokers being plunged into his eye sockets. His body tries weakly to shudder against the onslaught of pain, but only seems to manage a weak tremble. Every heartbeat, every shallow, strangled attempt at breath, brings with it another surge of overwhelming pain. It doesn't feel fair that Tim has to live every day in a body that works against him, that hurts itself when other people enjoy the feeling of living at home in theirs. His body has never felt like his own, and though it's something he accepted what seems like a lifetime ago, it does not mean that he doesn't wish it weren't true. Considering he was rather preoccupied with staying upright long enough to get down to the parking garage, Tim didn't really try to check the time on his phone when he texted Bruce. It could be minutes or hours before the rear driver's side door softly clicks open for all he knows. The sound feels like a shot going off to his oversensitive ears. Belatedly, his hands move to cover them before falling halfway through the movement from pure exhaustion. Then, Tim feels one warm hand sliding beneath his shoulder, while another gently cups his head long enough for someone to slide into the seat. Tim's head is pillowed on a lap that smells faintly of Bruce's cologne and fresh dry cleaning. The familiar hands carefully adjust the jacket over his eyes so that his mouth is no longer covered. The same worn hands come up to press 2 small pills into the young man's mouth. Tim takes them with little thought. In the back of his mind, behind the fog of pain, his brain supplies that the coating of the pills tastes bitter when they stick to his parched tongue. He cringes at the slight crackle of a plastic water bottle being uncapped, but accepts the sip of water before swallowing the pills down. There are more crinkling sounds from the water bottle, and then there's a soothing hand in his hair. It moves slowly, carefully avoiding his tender scalp in a practiced motion. Tim feels something hot and wet on his face that cools as it soaks into the fabric of his jacket. He foggily recognizes it to be tears. Bruce knows better than to whisper the soothing reassurances he so badly wants to give his son. He knows from experience that it only makes things worse. Bruce would need more than 2 hands to count the number of times he had to sit silently, just like this, to help Tim work through a migraine. As painful as it is for Bruce to have to sit by and watch one of his children suffer like this, he knows it's infinitely worse for Tim. Knows the medication only do so much to stop the onslaught of misery. He feels totally useless sitting there watching the tears soak through Tim's discarded suit jacket, while his small body is racked with shivers. Tim's teeth weakly chatter as he's overwhelmed with agony. All he can do is stroke his fingers through dark hair and wait for the meds to kick in enough to put his son to sleep long enough to let him drive back to the manor. Bruce had seen all of his children suffer major injuries, seen one of them dead, seen most of them on the brink of death, but it never gets easier. Each time it's just as heart-wrenching as the first. Each time he can feel the acidic burn of panic rise in the back of his throat. Feels his stomach clench as his heart skips, knowing that he's too late to shield them from whatever pain comes their way. Knowing that he wasn't there when they needed him, it never gets easier. He can't help but think of a younger Tim, alone in a cold, impersonal house. No one there to hold him, no one there to wipe his tears or stroke his hair, no one there to rub a hand against his back as he gags over the toilet in a dark bathroom. No one there to tell him that it isn't his fault his body hurts this way. A younger Tim, even smaller than his is now, bound to his bed for days at a time with legs too weak to support his body, without even an attempt to manage the pain. A younger Tim who doesn't know better, who hasn't figured out that it's not everyone who has days like this, where it feels like their skull is being ripped apart, who doesn't even know that it isn't normal for his head to hurt every single day. And oh, how Bruce wishes he could have been there to tell this boy, his son, whom he would trust with the entire world, that it's going to be all right, that he'll be there to wipe the tears and hold him close and stroke his hair when the pain is too much to bear alone. Finally, Tim's breaths begin to even out and his shivers seem to subside. A glance at his watch tells Bruce that it's taken about 45 minutes for the meds to let Tim drift in an uneasy sleep. Carefully, so carefully, Bruce lays Tim's head back into the seat, folding his own jacket into a makeshift pillow. He opens and shuts the car door as quietly as he can before getting into the driver's seat and beginning the journey back to the manor. He knows Tim would rather go back to work, but seeing as his lunch period ended an hour ago, and the fact that Bruce already rescheduled both of their afternoon meetings on his way here, the point is moot. What Tim needs now is to be safe at home, in his bed, with someone there to take care of him. Bruce swears that for every time Tim has had to suffer alone, there will be 100 times Bruce will be there to fight the battle for him. This concludes It Comes in Waves as the Shouts Turn to Whispers by Queen of All Hell, read by Insect Overlord. I really like this one. I think that it is very accurate for how migraines are as someone who also suffers from migraines. I hope that you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for listening.